Hey, what's going on guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'll be reviewing the Nike Air Zoom TR1. So 3 pros that I have with the Air Zoom TR1 is number 1, if you are really big on having a training shoe with a lot of responsiveness, this can be a really good option to look into. With the medium density foam midsole in this model combined with the Air Zoom packet, this model has a ton of bounce. And so I think if you are that person that loves having a shoe that's very bouncy for jump rope, box jumps, class style, circuit style workouts, this model can be a really good option to look into, especially if you're already wearing a running shoe and you want something that's a little bit more stable and geared for that type of workout. That's where I think this shoe can fill that void really well. The second pro that I have with this shoe is I think if you're somebody who on a weekly basis does some short runs, some light strength training, and then a lot of plyometric or class style workouts, that's where this shoe will excel as well. So outside of just being a very bouncy shoe, I think if you're somebody who's a lot more recreational with your lifting and you don't plan on going super heavy, but you want that shoe that can kind of transcend some short runs, some HIIT workouts, that's where this model will also work really well. It's kind of geared for that, and it's going to have limitations with lifting, CrossFit, etc. I'll talk about that in my cons, but for more general lifting, the shoe does a pretty good job. The third pro that I have with this model is I like the outsole tread in this shoe. You get some lugs up here through the forefoot and midfoot, and so if you're training on turf, this model does a pretty dang good job with giving you grip. The Nike Free Metcon 5 does a pretty good job, and it's also I would say a comparable peer to this model regarding its functionality, but I do think the outsole in this shoe takes a slight edge over the Nike Free Metcon 5. So if you are somebody that wants that more HIIT focused shoe or more versatile focused training shoe, and you train on turf and you train on different surfaces and you want a shoe with giving you the most amount of traction possible, this can be a really good option to look into with its full rubber outsole. But now let's talk about a couple of cons that I have with the Air Zoom TR1. So 3 cons that I have with the Nike Air Zoom TR1 is number 1, I don't think this shoe is going to be a shoe that everybody should necessarily buy. So in the context of training shoes and looking at the spectrum of training shoes and how they're designed and what they're designed to do, I would say this is more of a vanity training shoe, as in if you were only going to buy one singular shoe for your training, I would not say go with this model. There are stronger shoes out there that will perform just as strong as this model, but even be a little bit better for certain verticals. So all that said, the shoe is okay. However, with its limited functionality, I don't see it as a shoe that everyone should necessarily invest in, especially for a price point of $130 USD. The second con that I have with the shoe is that it's gonna lack a little bit of width up here in the forefoot for my wider footed friends out there. So I have an E-width foot, and I noticed the toe box in this shoe. I wish it was a little bit wider. In the Nike Metcon 9, we have a bit more of an anatomical toe box, and I like how that fits a lot better. In this shoe, I definitely notice the snugness through the toe box. So if you are somebody that has a wider foot, or you're just used to wider fitting shoes, you might feel a little bit limited in the Air Zoom TR1. My third con with this model is just understanding that it's going to have some limitations. So it's not going to be your shoe that you can use for most CrossFit WODs, in my opinion. And for lifting, I would say probably cap your loading around 315 pounds. After I pushed that threshold, I started to notice this midsole compress a bit more. You start to pick up and notice that Air Zoom packet a little bit more. So if you want the most amount of stability possible for your lifting, this would not be your best bet. Also for heavy machine work, I also think you'll notice the Air Zoom packet. It's one of those things that you don't really necessarily feel unless you know what you're looking for, or you push that certain threshold of weight being lifted. But all that said, the shoe is an okay shoe regarding its performance. I just don't think it's going to be a model that everybody should go out and run and invest in. But all that said, let's talk about the performance of this shoe. To break down the performance of the Nike Air Zoom TR1, I'm going to talk about how this shoe performs for lifting, versatile training, short runs, and daily wear. In the context of lifting, the shoe will be okay for most beginner and intermediate lifters, and for that person that wants a shoe for HIIT workouts, classes, but then also some strength training on a weekly basis. This model does a pretty good job with single leg work. It's okay for lower body movements. And again, what I would suggest is capping your loading, like if you're doing barbell lifts, to about 315 pounds in this shoe. If you're working under that threshold, these should be plenty fine. And if, for example, you're somebody doing a light squat where you're doing a more plyo or velocity focused intent with a plyometric, that's where I think the shoe will make a lot of sense. But once you start pushing heavier weight, I think you'll start to notice some midsole compression with that lack of width in the toe box. That could also be uncomfortable, and you'll start to pick up on that Air Zoom packet a little bit more, which could also hinder your balance and stability in certain training and lifting settings. When it comes to versatile training, I like this shoe for the most part. Is this my favorite shoe for versatile training? Not necessarily, but I do see that kind of more unique feel of the Air Zoom packet as being a hit for some folks. So So if, for example, you have notoriously loved Nike shoes that have a little bit of that Air Zoom packet and a little more bounce and pop to them, I think you will resonate with the shoe a lot. I picked up on it pretty quick, and I'm not necessarily a lover of the Air Zoom packet in most models, but I do think it has a unique feature for versatile training in certain contexts. So with this shoe, I think it will be best for folks doing circuit style workouts in classes and also workouts on various floors, because with this rubber tread, you do get a bit more grip than other HIIT focused shoes that don't necessarily have full rubber outsoles because they're trying to save on weight. So if you're looking for that shoe for your class style workouts, this model should work pretty well. Just keep in mind that the breathability is not the best in this model, and it's gonna lack a little bit of width up here in the forefoot. When it comes to short runs, the shoe should work if you're running like 1 to 2, even 3 miles. So with this model, you do get a pretty plush ride, and I think once you break it in, it also feels a little bit better with that heel beveling and the bit of toe spring in the shoe as well. It does help you kind of transition from like a cross training or lifting setting into a run. So if you are doing more of a hybrid workout, this model can work. Just keep in mind that I would keep your loading lighter in that hybrid context. But if you are somebody that likes to tack on 1, 2, maybe even 3 miles pre or post workout, the shoe should do an okay job for that. Is it going to be the most comfortable shoe on the market for that running context? No, but it should outperform other cross training shoes that run a little bit more on the dense side with their midsoles. When it comes to daily wear, the shoe does a pretty good job. It's overall pretty comfortable regarding its midsole and its Air Zoom packet. And with the outsole, I do think you'll get a good amount of durability and protection from the elements. But what I would say is that if you want the shoe to last longer, I would say save them for the gym use. You don't want any dirt getting on this foam midsole and breaking that down fast. Also, with its forefoot lacking a little bit of width, I find them to be uncomfortable if I'm on my feet all day standing and doing longer walks. So keep that in mind with this shoe. It can work for walking and daily wear, but it might not be your best shoe for wearing all day. When chatting on the price of the Nike Air Zoom TR1, you could expect to pay $130 USD. And to be honest, I'm a little bit hit or miss on that price point because, again, with this shoe, I don't think it's a shoe that everybody should invest in. But if you have the means and if you just like different feeling training shoes for different verticals, that's where I think the price point makes more sense. But if you have $130 and you only have $130 to buy a singular shoe, I would say go with other options, and let me know in the comments below if that is you, and let me know how you train, and I can kick you some ideas based off of how you want your shoes for workouts. All right, so now let's answer the question, who is the Nike Air Zoom TR1 best for? So number one, if you are somebody who's primarily doing classes, HIIT workouts, and some lifting where you're doing a lot of velocity focus work at lighter thresholds, this shoe I think should work pretty well for you. The second context is if you're somebody who just loves different training shoes and like shoes that offer a little bit more of a unique feel for working out, this could also be a really good model. With this full Air Zoom packet, you get a really interesting feel in this shoe, and I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing in certain verticals, but again, it's gonna be definitely an acquired taste I think for most folks. The third vertical where I think this shoe makes a lot of sense is if you're somebody that's a bit more hybrid in nature with your training, and so on a weekly basis you're doing a couple miles or a couple intervals in your workouts and then you blend that with some strength or power focused work, this could be an awesome option to look into as well. With its full rubber tread, with its responsiveness, I think this shoe should work in that vertical. Now, who should pass on this model? Number one, I think if you're somebody who has only enough money for one singular shoe and you want a model that's really great for lifting but that can also work for cross training and also some short runs, I think there are stronger shoes on the market than this model. This again is what I would call more of a vanity training shoe. The second context is if you have wider feet, you'll want to also pass on this shoe. With that tapered toe box, I'm not convinced you'll have enough width to feel comfortable in the shoe, so keep that in mind if you have wider feet and you are investing in the Nike Air Zoom TR1. When it comes to the sizing and fit of the Air Zoom TR1, I think most folks should be safe going true to size in this model. So I have an E-width foot, and this model I think feels a little bit snug for my foot anatomy. Can I pull them off and do they feel overly uncomfortable for singular workouts? No, but if I'm wearing the shoe all day, I do notice the toe box. So if you have wider feet, especially in the forefoot, definitely keep that in mind with this model. But if you have more of your medium or neutral width feet, you should be safe going true to size in this shoe, and I think it'll be a good bet for most folks with that type of foot anatomy. All right, so now let's break down the weight, heel, toe drop, and insole in the Air Zoom TR1. For my size 10 model here, we have a weight of 10.6 ounces. The heel to toe drop in the shoe is not disclosed on Nike's site, and when I reached out, they couldn't really give me a firm answer, but it kind of feels to be like between 3 to 5 millimeters, so similar to the Nike Metcon 9 or the Nike Free Metcon 5 with their 4 and 5 millimeter drops respectively. In this model, you'd also have a thin foam removable insole, so if you want to take that insole out, you can. However, keep in mind you do have that Air Zoom packet that runs throughout the entirety of the shoe, so your insole could influence how that feels in this model if you're not using the stock insole. All right, so now let's break down the construction of the Nike Air Zoom TR1. Up here on the forefoot, we have an extended outsole layer that wraps up, And then looking at the upper construction of this shoe, we have a synthetic overlay that covers the toe box in this model. And then we have like this suede / mesh feeling material that runs throughout with some overlays to the midfoot. And then back here on the heel, we have a bit of a rigid boot cup. Looking at the midfoot in this model, you have 5 core eyelets that go up with a 6 back here for lace lock. You also have a tongue with additional loops for security, and the tongue itself is gusseted, so I don't think tongue security will be an issue for you in this model. Looking at the foam midsole, we have this medium density midsole. It has a lot of plushness up here in the forefoot and a bit more stability back here in the heel, but overall the shoe does have a nice bounce to it, and that is because also you have this Nike Air Zoom packet that runs throughout the entirety of this shoe's sole. So as opposed to example for like the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2 that has an air packet up in the forefoot of the drop-in midsole, this model is built into the internal footbed of the shoe and it wraps the entirety of this shoe. Looking at the outsole in this model, you have a full rubber tread with a few breaks up here in the forefoot to give you a bit more flexibility, and this model once again has a removable insole. Overall though, that kind of wraps up the gist of this shoe's construction. If you have additional questions, drop a comment down below. All right guys, that wraps up my review of the Nike Air Zoom TR1. Is this going to be a training shoe for everybody? I don't think so. And is the price point worth it for this model? I find it to be very hit or miss, but I do think there are some unique and very specific contexts where the shoe can excel. If you have additional questions on this model, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, y'all, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.